perspective to give us, but I'd like to ask 5 minutes. Each of you will testify, and then after each of your opening statements, then I'll move to questions from the members. So with that, I'd like to begin with the Attorney General, Representative, you, Mr. Kershaw, if I may. Am I saying that correctly? Kershaw, okay. To give us the 30,000-foot view of what has changed with the Trump administration as opposed to what we've dealt with over the previous 4 years. And then I'll go to Director Martin, and then I'll come to you, General Sulzer. So with that, Mr. Kirshner, if you would, please state your name, whom you represent for the record, and the floor is yours.
My name is Ryan Kircher. I'm Chief of Special for the Office of the Attorney General. Having me, privilege to be here in privilege. Need a small but capable, but I appreciate the committee open by staff, lawyers, and legal assistants. And our job is to be relevant and ready to policy-oriented and constitutional. Last 4 years, it has been defensive side, challenged federal administrative policies that were made the border less secure and that, in our view, were unlawful or unconstitutional. We have also defended against challenges from the federal government, specifically to the placement of concertina wire and the use of concertina wire along the border, as well as to the placement of buoys. So we do it on offense and on defense. That makes up about 14 cases right now. One of those cases has since been dismissed. Mr. Chairman, to your 30,000-foot question, most of that litigation is in a standstill at the moment. The DOJ, under the new administration, is still awaiting the placement of new intermediate level leadership. In fact, just yesterday, there was a federal Senate committee hearing on the confirmation of 3 of those leaders, including Texas OAG alumnus Aaron Reitz, who has been nominated to lead the Office of Legal Policy in D.C. Absent that intermediate leadership, it's very difficult for the DOJ line lawyers with whom we regularly interface to make decisions about these cases. In many cases, the administrative policy that was the source of the litigation, so for example, the use of the CBP-1 app, that was the source of a couple of pieces of litigation that my division has been handling. The Trump administration has ended the use of that app, and so some of the rules that were issued under the previous administration that would allow that app to control or influence border crossings are in a sort of a legal limbo. We are working through how best to move forward in those cases where the policies have disappeared or where the federal position may have changed, but we are getting a pretty uniform answer from the DOJ right now, which is that it is too early for them to make decisions on what to do with that litigation. Some of those decisions will have to do with where the litigation sits from a procedural standpoint. Is it fully briefed? Is it on appeal? Those kinds of issues. I won't get into our specific ruminations on those, at least in a public forum, because a lot of those considerations will be privileged. But from a 30,000-foot view, I think the short takeaway is we are in a holding pattern until DOJ leadership is in place and can start making decisions based on new policies.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Director Martin, you are recognized. Let's see if I can turn it on here. Oops. There we go.
There it is. Chairman, Vice Chair, Senators, Freeman Martin, Texas Department of Public Safety. There's so many things we could talk about and go into detail for, but a very high level overview is that we've done many operations in the past on the border. 2014 with unaccompanied children. We had Operation Linebacker, Operation Secure Texas. In all these missions, Border Patrol is overwhelmed, they're taken offline, and DPS would come in and fill the gap, detect and interdict incursions between the point of entry. I remember when we had a conversation with President Obama and his Homeland Security Secretary, Jay Johnson, during one of these missions where Jay Johnson made the statement there were about 6,000 a week were crossing the southern border. and he says anything over 6,000 was a crisis. Well, what happened in 2021 is we went the all-time record for apprehensions on the southern border. It just in Texas was right at 1.3 million, the highest ever. The highest ever before that was 1986, there were 726,000. In 2020, it was 300,000, and we jumped to nearly 1.3 million. So they're just completely overwhelmed. And what happened was exactly what you would expect to happen. Everything went in the wrong direction. DPS seizures of fentanyl increased 1,272%. Opioid overdoses in Texas increased. Drownings in the river increased. Migrants dying from exposure increased. Brooks County alone had a 250% increase in migrants recovered, bodies recovered in Brooks County on rural ranches. Border Patrol had reported 883 migrant deaths. Just everything went, the trafficking cases, the pursuits, you name it, all the numbers went in the wrong direction. Our strategy of detecting and interdicting, when they weren't enforcing Title VIII, there was no remain in Mexico, there was no deportation. The process, the federal immigration their policy was to process and release. So if we caught somebody and there's no consequences, we didn't have a criminal charge, we didn't have a state offense to charge them with, we turned them over to Border Patrol and they were processed and released. There was absolutely no deterrent. Governor Greg Abbott launched Operation Lone Star March of 21. We changed our strategies. We worked with landowners to get criminal trespass agreements, try to implement some consequences. But the big shift was the strategy of moving to a blocking, denying, deterring with the Texas Military Department, and they did a great job. Texas historically has got about 70 to 80% of the illegal migration of the entire southwest border. There's 9 sectors, Border Patrol sectors on the border. 5 of those are in Texas. The Rio Grande Valley, Senator Hinojosa knows very well, has always been ground zero. And that's where is 60, 70%. So that's what we were seeing in 2021. When TMD engaged, they blocked that, concertina wire, no-climb fencing, the barriers. We worked with the landowners enforcing criminal trespass, just a zero tolerance. If we had a state offense, we filed it. And then migration shifted to Eagle Pass, the Del Rio sector. And then you saw what happened there. Even early on with the Haitian incident, but then we were accustomed to 6,000 a day in Texas at that time. Border Patrol was completely overwhelmed. They were taken offline. There were many days we would get a call from Border Patrol and they'd say, hey, we have no agents patrolling in this sector. The entire sector, none. So when we're talking about how high these numbers are, and then you hear, 2 million gotaways, well, those are known gotaways. Nobody knows the unknown gotaways that were never apprehended. And so we work very closely with Border Patrol. A lot of you hear about the civil suits and stuff, those were policy driven from DC with a few individuals. For the most part, Border Patrol works very well with us. But when TMD took over Shelby Park, where the processing center, where they were taking the migrants in, those numbers dropped dramatically. We started working with landowners. TMD laid no-climb fencing for miles and miles and concertina wire, Connex boxes. We did many more landowner agreements, and we made a lot of arrests. And I supplied you with the OLS dashboard. You can see that just huge numbers. But the migration shifted again to El Paso. We used the similar techniques in El Paso. What was different in El Paso, there's a lot of federal property. And TMD actually put concertina wire and no-climb fencing and barriers on this federal property. And it's kind of ironic that we were sued by the federal government for all these other things, but we were allowed to keep it on federal property in El Paso. What happened there was a lot of it shifted further west. And, if you talk about success or, over the 4 years of Operation Lone Star, we went from 70 to 80% of the illegal migration to 25, 30%. It shifted to Tucson and it shifted to Arizona. And our biggest problem in Texas was the El Paso sector includes New Mexico. And the cartel shifted and they were moving migrants into New Mexico. and then they come into El Paso, and which resulted in a lot of our pursuits and a lot of our issues there with the stash houses. Where are we at today? Changes in federal policy. We had the big shift west. The numbers were already down. The new administration, new policies, the lowest numbers we have ever seen. We went from 6,000 a day. There were several days last week that we had less than 100 in the entire Texas, all 5 sectors. So we've been under 200 for like almost 2 weeks now. The numbers have plummeted, but what hasn't changed is there's still criminals exploiting between the point of entry. Border Patrol is back online. They're patrolling. Their morale is good. They're working with us, but we're still averaging 70 to 100 arrests a week. And just this last week, we seized 7 firearms, 22 pounds of methamphetamines, 80 arrests. So the work continues. And then what we know is already here. We got the gangs, drugs, national security threats, TDA, the Venezuelan problem, the human trafficking. We're seeing cases like we've never seen. In the last 4 years, there are 115,000 migrants were booked into Texas jails for criminal offenses. Of those, 11,000 have active felony warrants have active warrants right now, and we've identified 5,400 that have felony warrants for rape, robbery, murder, trafficking, and those are what we really prioritized on in our criminal illegal migrant program that we've been working, and we're working now really closely with the federal government on that also. The TDA, we had 5,200 Venezuelans booked into Texas jails. 280 of them have current warrants. Well, you know the problem with TDA, they're not in a database. Many of these are TDA. That's a priority. Drugs. In the last 2 weeks, we had a seizure of 156 kilos of methamphetamine in Colony Ridge and 624 kilos in Houston in just 2 cases. The market is flooded with meth right now. And then, of course, we're working with ICE and HSI in their operations. 2 operations, one this week, we've already arrested 118 in the Houston area, Colony Ridge, and then last week was 144 in an El Paso operation. Fast forward, something that people don't talk about much is the national security threat. We work very closely with FBI and JTTF, and you heard the federal government, even under the Biden administration, talk about over and over and over is the threat level has never been higher. There's blinking lights everywhere. I supplied you with our BOSA report. If you look at page 2 on that and the special interest countries on there and the numbers, it'll just shock you to your core of how many are here. And that's what they're talking about without saying it out loud. So we've ramped up with JTTF participation. You look at the terrorist screening data set encounters. In 2017, we had 2. 2018, we had 6. 2019, 0. 2020, we had 3. 2021, we had 15. 2022, we had 98. 2023, we had 169. Those are actually apprehended between the point of entries. Those are not surrenders looking for Border Patrol. These are trying to get away. So the numbers are just, that the national security threat has never been higher, and we're hyper focused on that.
Okay.
To further that, in June of last year, DHS OIG put out a report under Mayorkas, this is his HSI, about the inadequate vetting of these special interest aliens that are apprehended on the border. So, hey, I'll stop there and prepare to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it, Director. I'm trying. We have to be on the floor at 10, and I want to train to standard, not to time, but get the members' questions asked, but try not to have to come back because y'all have busy days. So with that, General Sulzer, you're recognized.
Good morning. I'm Major General Tom Selzer, the Adjutant General from the Texas Military Department. Chairman Birdwell, Vice Chair Flores, and committee members, thank you for allowing us to appear before you today. Governor Abbott boldly launched Operation Lone Star nearly 4 years ago to defend the people of Texas in the face of open border policies that not only encouraged mass illegal entry into the country, but created a permissive environment for violent criminals gang members, known terrorists, and other hostile foreign actors to threaten the security and sovereignty of our state and nation. Under the governor's leadership and with the strong support of this legislature, the Texas Military Department deployed an array of strategies to combat the ensuing invasion, including establishing hundreds of miles of defensive barriers to deter and deny unlawful entry, employing advanced tools to repel would-be illegal aliens, and utilizing enhanced technology to interdict foreign actors. Today, we have over 5,000 state active duty personnel on Operation Lone Star, with hundreds of additional personnel across our department providing daily support to this mission. Lone Star is now a mostly all-volunteer operation, with 99% of our personnel volunteering to join or remain on this mission. Our task forces are arrayed from Brownsville to El Paso in 3 task forces under the control of Joint Task Force Lone Star, which is headquartered in Eagle Pass. Over the last few years, we've expanded our capabilities to include boat teams that patrol hundreds of river miles, drones with infrared and visual cameras, and trucks that use cameras and radar to detect and track illicit activity at considerable distance. We also employ brush teams, security points, and roving patrols that block and interdict illegal smuggling on land. We have also created contingency forces with 2 quick reaction forces totaling 92 personnel that can respond to the border in 48 hours, and the Texas Tactical Border Force composed of 453 personnel that can deploy in 96 hours. Since the launch of Operation Lone Star, this multi-agency effort has led to over 531,000 illegal alien apprehensions and decreased illegal border crossings by 90%. To ensure we have every tool and authority necessary to be successful, last month, Governor Abbott entered into an agreement with U.S. Customs and Border Protection to deputize the Texas National Guard. We now work side by side with Border Patrol agents to stop illegal aliens from entering our country and to enforce immigration laws. We are also working closely with United States Northern Command to ensure unity of effort and mutual support as they deploy and employ forces as we work together to maintain operational control of the southern border. In closing, I'd like to thank Governor Abbott for his leadership in securing the border, protecting our state sovereignty, and upholding the rule of law. I would also like to thank this legislature for their enduring support for the men and women serving on Operation Lone Star. I look forward to your questions.
Okay. Thank you. Members, I normally defer to members first, and then I'll ask my questions last. But if I may, to my most senior senator, is it okay if I go first?
Of course.
Okay. Because I want to, when we did our interim report, I just want to set what I think is the current operational philosophy of what we're dealing with the change in administration and the good that we're seeing in, as you mentioned in your final comments about the rule of law. We're going to obey our laws, and we're going to protect the people of the United States, protect the people of Texas. With the change in administration, what we recommended in our to the legislature, to the governor, is keep our current footprint in place pending what will be that outcome of the final disposition under this administration of how much force, whether that's ICE, Border Patrol, you mentioned Northcom, General, that what are the federal assets that come into place? So it's very similar to when you do we talked about this briefly, a relief in place. That force comes in and then relieves the force that's on the border. We're not going to vacate and leave gaps, but once the federal government is arrayed and those assets are arrayed, do you have the capacity to evaluate where there are places that the state can fill in? And we won't know what those are going to look like because we're only 6 weeks into this administration. But at some point, there will be an opportunity for the state to reduce its footprint. But I think that's the governor's call. We've given him in the budget, at least the proposed budget, the same amount of funding to continue OLS as if the new administration were not in place. There is an opportunity to reduce, but I don't think we're going to know what that looks like till after the legislature's sine die out. So I think it's best left to the governor to make that decision because he gets the tactical reports that you guys provide. So it's kind of like you had said, Mr. Attorney General, that, that hold until we know more. So we're going to keep our footprint in place, but recognizing that there's an opportunity to, at some future date with this administration in place, to make a reduction. We also said that even though it makes sense to have a reduction, it does not make sense to completely terminate OLS for a couple of different reasons. One, we don't know who's going to put his hand on the Bible, his or her hand on the Bible on January 20th of 2029, and we don't want to lose the institutional knowledge that if you make a complete elimination, starting up from scratch again will be just as difficult as it was for the governor in 2021, but maintaining some amount of institutional knowledge. Is the assessment that I've just given, where I think we are, is that where y'all would y'all concur with that assessment of where we are?
Chairman, you're spot on, absolutely correct. And we're fortunate in Texas. We're talking about what we've done over the last 4 years. We couldn't have done any of this without the legislature. Y'all set us up to be able to deal with this threat by adding 500 troopers, and I believe it was the 87th legislative session, to beef up the borders, the Rio Grande Valley, regions 3 and 4, and to sustain that without having to deploy from out of region. But there's so many investments have been made. Some things, the processing centers, the prisons, the Segovia and Briscoe units that were turned into jail to meet jail standards for housing. Those things could probably be turned off at some point. But we've built the infrastructure to be able to ramp up or ramp down as needed. But for us, as they build up and we can do less deployments, when they're assigned to Operation Lone Star, they're working their days off. It's a 9-day deployment, so they get 2 days of 24 hours of straight overtime. They're working 12-hour days. So it's easy for us to turn that off and turn it on, but the legislature have set us up to be able to do that. And so the governor tells us to launch. We're ready to go, and if we need to turn it off or scale down, we're ready to do that also.
Okay. General Salter?
Yes, and I agree completely. It's going to be a capabilities-based assessment of when do we come off, if we come off, based on is operational control going to be maintained on the border. Governor Abbott, in his executive order GA 53, directed me to work with the NORTHCOM commander. We're doing that. Last week, my JTF Lone Star commander was with 10th Mountain Division. That will be the headquarters on the border, working with them. This week, we had 2 colonels up at NORTHCOM working with them. Next week, we have our head logistician going to Army North to work with them.
You're already running your own J-Flick.
We're already,
Forces Land Component Commander.
I've been on the phone with Deputy NORTHCOM Commander in the last 40 hours, 10th Mountain Division Commander in the last 48 hours. And I say all that just to say is that we are integrating and sharing information so that I can provide my best military advice to the governor of what the future looks like on the border, so he can make informed decisions about the future of the border.
Yeah.
And a lot of that will not only depend on forces, but on those authorities. So when the Title 10 forces are fully implemented on the border, what authorities do they have? And that will also have to be taken into account.
Okay. Mr. Attorney General,
I'm obviously in a very different posture than our brave men and women in uniform, both law enforcement and military, although we've been honored to partner with them in much of our litigation, particularly involving the concertina wire, where I had the good fortune of meeting both enlisted and officer members of TMD and working with DPS. I want to speak, though, Senator, to your comments about institutional knowledge. I think that matters because that's not just preparing for today, it's preparing for tomorrow. When we are looking at our litigation that is really a policy-based litigation, we are looking for resolutions to those lawsuits that ensure a healthy, safe border going forward, not just something that a win that we can wrap up. Attorney General Paxton is dedicated to border security, not just today, but going forward, not just under this administration, but under the next. And he was proud to be the first state elected official to sign a 287G MOA with federal officials so that the law enforcement elements of our office can coordinate with federal authorities in order to help secure the border.
Salter?
Yes, and I agree completely. You know, it's going to be a capabilities-based assessment of when do we come off, if we come off, based on is operational control going to be maintained on the border. Governor Abbott, in his executive order GA 53, directed me to work with the NORTHCOM commander. We're doing that. Last week, my JTF Lone Star commander was with 10th Mountain Division. That will be the headquarters on the border, working with them. This week, we had 2 colonels up at NORTHCOM, working with them. Next week, we have our head logistician going to Army North to work with them.
You're already running your own J-Flick.
We're already-
Joint Forces Land Component Commander.
I've been on the phone with, Deputy NORTHCOM commander in the last 40 hours, 10th Mountain Division commander in the last 48 hours. And I say all that just to say is that we are integrating and sharing information so that I can provide my best military advice to the governor of what the future looks like on the border, so he can make informed decisions about the future of the border.
Yeah.
And a lot of that will not only depend on forces, but on those authorities. So when the Title X forces are fully implemented on the border, what authorities do they have? And that will also have to be taken into account.
Okay. Mr. Attorney General,
I'm obviously in a very different posture than our brave men and women in uniform, both law enforcement and military, although we've been honored to partner with them in much of our litigation, particularly involving the concertina wire, where I had the good fortune of meeting both enlisted and officer members of TMD and working with DPS. I want to speak, though, Senator, to your comments about institutional knowledge. I think that matters because that's not just preparing for today, it's preparing for tomorrow. When we are looking at our litigation that is really a policy-based litigation, we are looking for resolutions to those lawsuits that ensure a healthy, safe border going forward, not just something that a win that we can wrap up. Attorney General Paxton is dedicated to border security, not just today, but going forward, not just under this administration, but under the next. And he was proud to be the first state elected official to sign a 287G MOA with federal officials so that the law enforcement elements of our office can coordinate with federal authorities in order to help secure the border.
okay. Let me ask this as a courtesy. Clearly, your advice goes to the governor. Clearly, y'all are going to have a faster view of the dynamics of what may change. I would just ask that when a decision's made, either in the courts or the Attorney General, that you inform the legislature and certainly this committee, the partner committee in the House, if y'all would do the same as you. Because we want to defer to the governor to make the tactical decisions as to how best to array based upon y'all's advice. But if the legislature has a response to that, that you give us the courtesy of knowing the dynamics that have changed for you to come to a decision point to make such a recommendation. But I don't think the legislature is going to move on anything until the governor makes decisions based upon y'all recommendations. The question I had when we did the interim charges, there was, because I think part of the reason for looking for that opportunity to reduce our footprint isn't just the savings economically that comes in that, but you generally have done a masterful job getting this to just all volunteers, that we're not impacting employers with the activation of the Guard that for such a long period of time. But the risk, particularly with DPS, of exhaustion, because I've heard it, the retirements that were happening, that an opportunity to give our assets less sand to put in their 5-pound bag. Can you speak to what the morale is and the opportunity to reduce that level of exhaustion, and particularly with DPS, number of moves back and forth and temporary deployments to the border, because that's one of those big considerations.
I can. we've adjusted many times, and we're used to deployments, hurricanes, wildfires, border, but they normally last a month or two, maybe 6 months at the most. So we were seeing problems 2 years into this that we had never seen before with morale. One thing that Director McCraw was great about was communicating with our employees, our troopers, our agents, our rangers. At every in-service, we stand before them and answer questions and talk about strategy and a high-level overview and get feedback from them. And we were seeing issues that we had never seen before. Similar to the TMD, we went to a voluntary, because we had certain individuals that wanted more overtime. They wanted the overtime, but their family life, their no kids, single, whatever, or empty nesters, they wanted to deploy, and sometimes we were forcing others to go. They had anniversaries, ball games. And our employees are great. They communicate. If you're in a sergeant area and they need to send 2 people, well, they'll stand up and volunteer because it fits their schedule. And they'll help somebody else and work out a holiday or this or that. So right now, it's great. We're actually deploying less and handling more from within region, so that the numbers are down. And we actually have employees that want the overtime, and you want people that want to be there. So the morale is good. Legislature has been great to us. We made other adjustments along the way. We were double shifting hotels, which was problematic. People coming in and out when the other ones only got a few hours to sleep. So we made adjustments, and the legislature was great working with us to accommodate those.
Thank you, Chief. Let me ask one more question, and then I'll go to the members. Last session, we did Senate Bill 602, which was the one that allowed us to train Border Patrol agents, because they were one of the federal law enforcement agencies that did not have felony arrest authority. We passed that bill, and then under the previous administration, they summarily rejected, we're not going to play. Have you seen a change in that with this administration, where the Border Patrol agents are going to come in, get training with DPS so that they can make, even though it's not a border specific, but it is border related at the checkpoints, to make a felony arrest on a state charge? Are you seeing the Border Patrol playing now?
You're absolutely correct. We developed the training. We had training scheduled. It was supported by the previous administration, and then it was all of a sudden shut down. I believe it was all the way to Secretary Mayorkas stopped that training.
Yeah.
They reached out to us last week, and so we dusted off the training plans, and I believe we have 2 scheduled as we speak, so it's back on.
Good deal, good deal. Senator Hinojosa, I believe you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up some of the questions that were asked by Chairman Birdwell, we the border has changed somewhat from the time we had the catch and release situation, which really overwhelmed our Border Patrol. And you're right, Colonel Freeman, Colonel Martin. They would pull the Border Patrol agents away from the border, which we live unprotected. That's where DPS, and I tell people, that's where DPS came in to try to plug those gaps. And the reason is we had Operation Linebacker, with all these cameras and trying to catch what's coming on or coming across, who was not being covered by Border Patrol. And I tell people and tell the general public that we took care of families who were seeking asylum. We processed families, provided them health care, provided them clothing, provided them food. But that was not the problem. It got to the point that less than 50% of the people coming across the border were families. More than 50% were individuals, single men coming across on those gaps that were left open by the Border Patrol when they were pulled off that line. And while, yes, some of those men may have been coming looking for work, many of them had a criminal record. And even those that were caught, we don't have the capability of checking their criminal record from the country they were coming from. But I remind people what happened in 9/11. It was only just a handful of terrorists that came in and caused all this damage and human tragedy. And you were there, Mr. Chairman, up at the Pentagon when they crashed that plane. So we get a hand. Excuse me. What many times we need to educate the public that many of the people come across that are terrorists We don't need thousands and thousands of them. You can have 30, 40 of them, and they create these cells that grow and expand. It is a real threat to our nation's security to have an open border policy. So I really am glad that at least we made some changes in the policy. We've seen under the Biden administration towards the end, he made some changes in policy that reduced the number of immigrants coming across, having to go through the process. And my point is this, and Chairman Birdwell alluded to it, and I use his own analogy, like when I was in Chulai and the Army came in and took over and they moved the Marines out of Chulai and relocated us to other parts of at that time, the theater at war. So here, at some point, and it's still early to tell, but at some point we have to look at our policies, make some adjustments in terms of assets, in terms of not only manpower, woman power, we have committed to the border. So in many respects, you're not ready to make those decisions. And I think the Attorney General's office talked about being like treading water to wait really to see what the Trump administration plans to do in terms of border policy. Would you agree with that? I mean, just from your comments?
You know it very well, and you hit on 10 different things. I'm actually on the ICP Committee on Terrorism, and work very closely with JTTF, and you know, there's a lot of stuff we can't talk about, but some stuff is out in the public, and one is like the most recent incident with Tajikistan, where there was a nationwide search. They had these were people that came from Tajikistan. They were caught, they were processed, and they were released, but they weren't on anybody's radar, which means you know the vetting process. Venezuela, we don't know if they've been released from prison. We don't know if they committed a murder. We don't know their criminal history. We just know they're from Venezuela. They are who they say they are, and we don't know until they commit a crime here. But the Tajikistan, they weren't on the radar until they got picked up on a phone call, planning a terrorist plot. And then these were identified because they were caught up in this with the confidential informant in this investigation. But then as you start looking at, well, how many others? Well, we had 175 apprehended and released from Tajikistan just into Texas in the last 4 years. That's just one example that's out in the public we can talk about. But you're exactly right. We don't, you know, there's the vetting process. They don't have a criminal history. They don't have a TCIC, NCIC in Venezuela. Yeah. So that's what we're seeing right now. There are many of them here. Many of them are good people and want a better way of life. But if the numbers that we saw come across, if 1% have malintent, we have problems. You mentioned the 9/11.
Two other quick points, and that is that many of the people coming across the border now, they're not necessarily from Mexico or countries that we know. They're coming from all over the world, from the Middle East, from even terrorist countries. So in trying to educate the public that we are trying to make sure that we protect our security here, our national security in our communities, that we are trying to focus in a managed border. We're not against legal immigration. And as long as we vet the people that are coming across, go through a proper process. Our problem is when we don't know who's coming in, and I think we have the right to know that. One last point, and that is on the troopers, you have rotations. The rotations are not for 6 months, they're only for 7, 8 days at a time.
Yes, sir, 9 days.
9 days. And I drive many times back and forth from the Valley to Austin, so I see all the troopers' cars going south, going north. But one thing has changed. I don't hear as many complaints as there used to be about troopers having to be sent down there without consideration for the family, consideration for, as you said, for special occasions to the family. Those type of complaints have really not disappeared, but a lot more manageable. You don't hear that as often. I see them many times. They will stop at McDonald's or stop at one of the driving stores. So it's I talk to them. I usually go up to them and ask them what are they doing, where are they going, where are they coming from. So they tell me a lot of stuff there, how they really feel about the situation. But I think you have done a pretty good job at addressing some of the concerns and some of the troopers have expressed to the legislators. But thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hinojosa. I see the troopers in my rearview mirror or here in the Capitol, so I'd like to see. Senator Eckhart, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. Actually, I just left my green light on. I
Oh,
will
okay.
leave off.
Okay. Senator Hinojosa of Nueces.
Thank you. Thank y'all for being here. Colonel Martin, it's great to see you again. Thank you for your service, General. Thank you for your service. Colonel Martin, when we had our meeting and we were talking about some of the additional challenges that you have, particularly with when I was proposing my overweight corridor to increase trade in my lower Rio Grande Valley area, and you were explaining the challenges with fuel depots, the pop-up fuel depots, and those kinds of things that were occurring, criminal activity that was occurring, and some of the things that you were concerned about. I'd like you to could you share that again with us here as to what that concern was and how and what we could possibly do, because my bill, whether we pass it or not, we still have this issue without it. So can you kind of explain that for the rest of us, and then also give us some ideas on how to fix that?
I can, and you know the situation in Mexico. There's so much corruption, oil and gas and theft, and they're very reliant on the United States for fuel, for gas and diesel. The fuel trucks in the Rio Grande Valley, there's many of them, and it's big money. For us, it's pretty easy because you guys passed the laws. We enforce the laws, and part of that is the Federal Motor Carrier. And we've been around the world in Texas with the Texas Trucking Association and milk trucks examples. They wanted to haul 90,000 pounds. There was a lot of work. There were policies implemented by the legislature to allow them to run at 90 pounds. If they had they could baffle their load so it didn't swish back and forth as liquid. Extra brakes, rollover technology, more axles, and these fuel trucks, the difference is a lot of them, they're Mexican trucks. They're unsafe. When the troopers stop them, they have problems. They will fill up at the port, or they'll fill up they'll be legal. They'll be at 90,000 pounds, or they'll have a permit to be overweight. So when they get stopped, they will present a trooper, and the trooper can tell that's what they do. Or commercial vehicle enforcement troopers, they can tell this truck is heavy. They're like, we're going to weigh you anyway. Well, this says you're at 80,000 pounds, but we weigh you and you're at 140,000 pounds in a truck that's unsafe, hauling hazardous materials. They're off route from the most nearest point of entry where they can cross. And then you figure out when they left, they stopped somewhere else and topped off at a mom and pop depot. Because when they cross into Mexico, they're going to pay the cartel $5,000 a load. That's whether they're at 80,000 pounds or 140,000 pounds, it's still $5,000. So it's financially beneficial for them to do that. We run some targeted enforcements down there. They use cartel tactics against us. They have scouts. They see when the troopers at 3 o'clock in the morning go back to the hotel, they'll launch 50 trucks at once, knowing that we can only catch 2 or 3. So for us, it's we're either going to force the law or we're not. Yeah. So we're running task force. There's a lot of operations going down there. I know there's a lot of them that try to be legal, lawful, and do right. But there's also a percentage of them that is just they're outlaw trucking companies.
Let me respond this way too, if I may, Senator. We had that charge was assigned to this committee during the interim. I've been developing legislation. We haven't filed the bill yet because we're still consulting with the chief and his team, but look forward to working with you on that because it's a major issue.
Yeah, thank you. And
well, I think you've got something as well that you're working, I believe. So.
Yeah, well, it's a big issue down in the valley, the contraband and what they're doing. But we've been working with Major Villarreal.
Yes, sir.
And also with the Lieutenant Governor's office, and so we'll work with you. And
I would love that. I would love that because I mean, and I when we were talking in my office, and brought this to light, we've already also been trying to work on some possible solutions for that because, 100% support your efforts, but at the same time, we cannot allow cartel activity to dictate commerce in the United States. That is unacceptable, especially for my district down there. We've got a lot of opportunity and a lot of impoverished people that can benefit from increased trade. We don't want cartel activity dictating that, and so any way we can fix that. Look forward to working with you. Look forward to working with the other members with regard to that. So do we have your commitment that we get these things fixed, that we could get your support for overweight stuff?
Absolutely, and you're spot on this. That territory, that's the cartels are at war in that area, and it's so violent. So it's beneficial for these fuel trucks to go 50 miles up the road and cross it far versus crossing right there, because the cartel is kinder, gentler, they're cheaper, and they're more organized. And so, but absolutely, we'll work with you.
Well, thank you so much. And then just one other last point. I'm sure most of the members probably already know, but for those who do not, we talk about the various different bridges down there, the trade bridges in the Rio Grande Valley. A lot of people don't realize that on the Mexico side, there's a couple that are government owned and operated, and those are the bigger ones, like in FAR. Those are the nicer ones, have been developed, they're a lot more secure. And then down in the lower Rio Grande, they're privately owned on the other side of on the Mexico side. So that's why cartel activity is more prominent. That's why they can hold trade hostage. Those are things that and this is again the premise behind trying to expand those corridors, so we do not allow cartel to dictate our trade. We get them to where we can get through a lot more efficiently, and that's also the difference in the fees. Also, fee structure. It's not consistent throughout there because there's different ownership on the other side of the Mexico border.
Thank you, Senator. We have just a few minutes left. Senator Eckhart, you're recognized.
A couple of discrete questions. Mr. Kircher, you didn't get much action here today, so I thought I would ask you a couple of questions. With regard to the Office of Attorney General, how large is the TCOL certified law enforcement staff?
So that'll fall under the leadership of Deputy Attorney General Josh Reno, who's here. I'm happy to defer to him to answer that question. I'm just a humble litigator in a bow tie.
Okay. That would be awesome. Hello.
Good morning, Senators. Josh Reno, Deputy Attorney General for Criminal Justice. We have around 200 certified peace officers. About 100 of those are in our Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, and the other 100 are in our Criminal Investigations Division.
And I believe you're asking for additional FTE, law enforcement FTE?
That is correct.
And how much of your personnel is dedicated to border or immigration issues?
We don't have anything that is dedicated to border and immigration issues. What we have is overlap with some of the functions that we have, mostly in our fugitive apprehension unit, and we have a few of our peace officers that are embedded with task force that do a lot of the work down on the border.
Okay. And how has the number of law enforcement personnel in the Office of Attorney General changed over time?
I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think we have increased the number of FTEs other than what was provided by the legislature for human trafficking and for elections, and I believe that was back in 2019. But since then, we have not increased FTEs within the CID in many, many years.
And under whose law enforcement command are the law enforcement personnel in the Office of the Attorney General? Who's in charge?
Attorney General Ken Paxton.
Well, I mean, who's in charge? Who is a law enforcement
Okay.
Individual? Because as you know, law enforcement must report to law enforcement.
Sure. So I oversee our law enforcement divisions, and our law enforcement director is Brent Dupre, who's oversees both the criminal investigation division as well as the Medicaid fraud control unit. But he course, in the structure of it, is underneath me, and then I am underneath Attorney General Ken Paxton.
So Britt Dupre is the highest peace officer.
That is correct.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you, members. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. Let me, Mr. Kersher, if you would, please state your name and whom you represent for the record, because we didn't get that on the audio recording. So,
Sure. Ryan Kircher, I'm Chief of Special Litigation for the Office of the Attorney General.
okay. Thank you. Thank you all for your work and your service. Certainly, as legal dispositions occur, if you'd let us know. Continue to give your advice and counsel to the governor, because the legislature is going to defer to his discretion on where we should be, and then respond to his requests and needs that we're doing with Operation Lone Star, and just keep us posted. And thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for all those young troopers, young soldiers and airmen that are, in the far-flung parts of the state doing what they're doing. God bless each and every one of you. Thank all for joining us today.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, thank you for your attention and your questions. One quick administrative announcement. It is my intent that either on Fridays, certainly not later than Mondays, we will post for our hearings on Thursday. I always try to provide the greatest amount of notice to the members of the committee that so you know what bills we're going to hear. You have time. I always try to make sure that we're as courteous to the members as we can to give you notice, and we don't hand you things at the last minute. So it's my intent to post on Fridays, but certainly have till Monday morning to post. But my objective will be on Fridays to post. So with that, if there's any other business to come before the Senate Committee on Border Security, hearing and seeing none, the committee stands in recess, subject to the call to the chair. Thank you, members.